Okay, it's about 3:05 now. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start my presentation. Is everyone in there? Okay, there we go. That's about everyone. All right. So we are the Game Development Club here, but we are also the Game Design Club. So I would like to give some tips about game design and as well as how you can implement them into your development. So first of all, I would just like to say whether you want to make a game that makes your player laugh, cry, or just have fun, the goal really is about creating catharsis and satisfaction for your player. And really, the main thing you want to avoid is boredom, I would say. The last thing you want your player to feel is boredom. And in this demo in particular, I'm going to be focusing on the fun aspect because that's the simplest way to go about making a game. Most of us want our games to be fun. But I would say these techniques can be used in just about any game. So let's start this demonstration. This will be 20 tiny tips to make your action game feel more satisfying. Since action games are relatively simple, they're usually what most people start off with as beginners when they're developing new games. That will be what I'm using for this demonstration. And so this is just a very simple game, a very simple prototype. Anyone can make this sort of thing. For this demonstration, it's just a very flat 2D game where you shoot enemies. And I do see this mistake. I'm going to call it a flaw that a lot of new developers, including myself, are guilty of, is that enemies often have too much HP. So that makes things very not fun to play, I would say. And so our very first tip would just to be to reduce enemy HP. That makes things a lot, generally makes things a lot more fun, but it also makes the game easier. And you may not want your game to be too easy, and you don't want it to be too hard either. Difficulty isn't necessarily the problem here. It's really just the excitement levels of the game that are the problem. And difficulty may be subjective, but I would say just you don't want to prolong a certain activity that your character is doing for too much time, or else it is very easy for them to get bored just fighting the exact same enemy for, like, look at that. That's not much going on here. The main way your character is interacting with this world and your player is interacting with this world is by shooting things. And so, of course, you want shooting to be fun. Whatever it is that your player is doing, you want it to be fun. And so this one's less of a tip. It's just to make the game a little bit more exciting. Of course, you're going to want to have moving targets. You don't want your enemies just to be standing still all the time. More importantly, my first big tip, screen shake. Screen shake is the spice of video games. A lot of beginner developers may not employ this technique, and if you ever ask yourself how can you improve your game, just ask yourself, does it have screen shake? If the answer is no, you don't use screen shake anywhere in this game. You might want to add it in specific places to make things more exciting. and it just feels a lot more satisfying. Specifically, on the development side of things, you would want to implement the screen shake at pivotal points in actions, such as when the enemy gets hit, but also when I shoot, there's also some screen shake. Even if I'm not hitting anything, just shooting the gun feels a lot more satisfying. And at this point in the game, in this point in the demonstration, just this is completely optional. If you would like to play along, I meant to do this earlier, but I just dropped the download link below, and you can scroll down and download this demonstration if you want to play along with me. But really, if you play it for yourself, either after or during this demonstration, it's a lot easier to feel this when you're actually playing the game than just watching it, I would say. But I think even if just from observing, you can see there's a lot more going on here just from this one small detail that's really not that much to implement, not that difficult to implement. And since before we move off the topic of screen shake, I would just like to say there are I personally use 3 different types. So this one, when I'm shooting, just moves in a single direction, and it's very consistent. If I can, yeah, there we go. As you can see, the screen shake direction is always in the same spot. It's always moving the screen slightly to the right of, in order to, to the left, because I'm shooting to the right. The screen is moving in the opposite direction, and so it just feels very natural. Because guns have recoil when you shoot them, so of course it's just very natural. It's very easy to understand when you implement this with shooting. It's just very intuitive. And as well, whenever I hit an enemy, the screen shake direction is random, so it doesn't just move to the left all the time. The screen moves sporadically, and as you can see, when I kill an enemy, the screen shake is much stronger, and this helps. Oh, there we go. This feels more satisfying, and you really want to reward your player with those dopamine hits of dopamine. Just like it feels a lot better, I would say. Impact effects. So when you're shooting things, of course, you want that little splatter effect. There's also different ways you could implement this, or I guess by drawing it differently. This one's just very simple, just a little splatter. Bigger bullets. This one's kind of a beginner mistake that I've made in the past. This looks boring compared to this, which feels way cooler. Look at that. Look how sick that looks. Just bigger bullets. It also makes the game easier to read, like on a mechanical sense. When the player is actually playing this is a lot easier to read the screen. Like if you have to make very split-second decisions, which is very important, especially in difficult games or fast-paced games. The player should be able to look at the screen at a glance and be able to understand what's happening, and just making not just bigger bullets, but like bigger things in general. You really only want small details if it's unimportant, but when it's something as big as like a bullet on the screen that impacts gameplay, you really want things that affect gameplay to stand out, and making them bigger is a very good way to do that, as well as different color combinations. I'm not going to talk too much about color theory here because I'm not an artist, but I will just say brightness is very useful for getting this message across. The bullets are very bright and the background is darker, it's more muted. So that also helps with readability. Muzzle flash. This is a very simple technique. It can be just as easy as making a circle on the screen and just making it white that lasts for 2 to 4 frames, like 1 to 3 frames, I would say. And let's see, let's take a look here. Yeah, 2 frames. So for this example, the muzzle flash only lasts for 2 frames. But it has an effect on the feeling of the gameplay, or the feeling of the game. It just, a few guns have muzzle flashes, so of course, little details like that go a long way. Faster bullets, this is a big one. This one, it's just a little detail, really, but it just really emphasizes the power of every bullet, every gunshot player does. This one, enemies fight back. This one's pretty simple. This one's not so much a technique as it is just trying to show off. When I get hit, there's some screen shake. Yeah, now it's like a real action game. Before, they're not really doing anything, and there's just the goal is pretty simple. It's just like a kind of like shooting targets. Now they're actual threats. Now you have something to avoid. Now you're not just shooting things, you're also dodging things, which is pretty self-explanatory. More enemies. I personally, when I was playtesting, I just felt the game was too easy. So I just added more, and it feels more exciting now. There's a lot more going on. Oh, I almost forgot. On the topic of enemies who can shoot at you, just a little design detail. This one's more of a beginner mistake, but when they first spawn, you don't want them to be able to shoot at you right away. So I have them idle for a little bit. So there's like a window of like half or a full second before they can actually start shooting you. That one's pretty important detail, I would say, just to make the game more fair. That isn't always in beginner developer games. Hit animation. So when an enemy gets hit, they turn white for about, I want to say, like a frame or two. Actually, no, I think I extended it much longer. That's right. So the impact effect is about 4 frames, and the hit animation where the enemies turn white, that one's about 8 frames. The numbers, you don't have to get too bogged down in the details, but really, what I'm trying to get at is that the hit animation, whatever it is, whether they're going to be just flashing white, which is very easy to implement, or whether it's something more difficult, like in a full-on animation where the enemy gets knocked backwards and you can visually like see a person like reacting to getting hit by a bullet. You want it to last longer than the impact effect. So that yellow splatter should be shorter than the lifetime of that splatter effect should be about the same or shorter than the animation of an enemy taking damage. Let's see. Okay, cool. Knockback. So another small detail, this one, um, it may look like it's affecting the gameplay. Um, if you look at the enemies when they get hit, or look at me when I get hit. So this is before. I'm just standing still whenever I take damage. And then this is after. You can see it's a little subtle. Most of these things most of these details only last like 2 to 8 frames, I would say. They're very small things. If they last any longer than if they last like any longer than like half a second, they can look like that might be overdoing it. For small things like this, if you're having like a huge special attack, then something like that may be appropriate. But for like attacks that are like happening and actions that are happening this often, you generally don't want to be shaking the screen like a lot all the time, and you also don't want to emphasize hit animations for too long and impact effects for too much. So that's why these things are very small, and if you don't pay attention to them, you probably can't even notice them in your mind. You're not really going to be thinking about them for the most part, which is why it's easy to forget to include these details in your game. A couple of these I added a little bit later in development, simply because I almost forgot them myself. And so that's why we're just going over this as a reminder, and maybe you didn't think to include these things, and maybe you like them, and maybe you want to include them in your game. So moving on, gun kickback. This is another this one's even smaller detail. It's just whenever you shoot, your player gets moved backwards. And this one's maybe not necessarily realistic. Doesn't really make sense for your whole body gets moved backwards, but this one's a little more cartoonish, but it does help emphasize the power of the gun that you're shooting. And really this, let's see. Permanence, this is a big one. And this one, relatively easy to implement. The details on this one, though, may be, how would I say? Oh, my dog's whining in the background. My dog wants me to pet her. There she go. Pick of dog. Okay, we'll take a dog break for. Yeah, I'm legally obligated to take a dog break. Oh, now they both want. Okay, now they both want to be pet. Okay. Double the dogs, double the breaks. Indeed. What was I talking? Oh, permanence. Okay. Let's see. Twice the bark, double the awe. You guys don't have to be quiet, by the way. You can unmute if you feel like and ask questions whenever you want. This dog, her name is Honey. She kind of looks like a fox. Or at least that's what people say, anyways. The other one walked off, so. The cone of shame. Yeah, she's a little sick right now. So she has a cone. So she doesn't bite herself. Or try to scratch herself where it hurts. Indeed, I also hope she feels better. All right. You may have noticed earlier, the game was, I think the game was lagging because for this demonstration, I was programming it in a very rushed manner. And so I did not remember to delete objects when they leave the screen. So all these bullets were just getting stored, all getting piled up in the memory. Yeah. I could have easily fixed that with one line of code, but that's just how it goes sometimes. Okay. Yep, even I make mistakes. Even I. Is GameMaker better for 2D? Oh, that's how Cowboy Zelda is programmed? Let's see. Is GameMaker better for 2D? How's Unity 2D? I need to mimic a retro game in Unity. Please recommend any tutorials. Okay, for sure I can drop you some tutorials afterwards. And GameMaker is primarily made for 2D, and it's a very good engine, I would say. Oh, great. Larry can send some tutorials. Perfect. And yeah, I love GameMaker. However, it is not at all fit for 3D. Some people may disagree with me. Some insanely smart people have been able to code 3D in GameMaker and make it work. And make it work well. I saw someone was making Super Mario 64 using GameMaker. What a madman. I could never do anything like that. But yeah, it's a very great engine for 2D games. So if that's what you're looking for, I can recommend it personally. Permanence. This really helps the game to feel more lively and feel like a real place that you're inhabiting for this however long you're playing it. And what this means is just like when an enemy dies, I mean, their corpse should stay on the screen, right? It's very easy to just have them disappear. It's very easy to program that sort of thing. With this, of course, you may not even think to do it because it takes time. And technically, it's very easy to implement if all you want is just a static corpse on the background. But for this demonstration, I decided to go a little bit of the extra mile.
If you want to make
them fall to the ground. So as you can see, it's not just a sprite switch from standing to laying down. When an enemy dies,
you want to make video games?
They fall down, and you can see that if you're looking at them. They fall down. And
Hello and
with
welcome.
permanence in particular, you want things to last. Um, this one's, I suppose, is a little bit more subjective. Sometimes it may be too distracting if there's too many things piling up on the screen. But just in general, you probably
If
want
you want to learn
some
how to
things
make
to
games
stay,
using the
some things to change. Um, it's for simple games like this, it's not at all a big deal to pile up objects on the screen because there's only one simple mechanic where you're shooting things. Um, for more complex games, like One Step from Eden, just as an example, because that's what I base this demonstration off of. Um, they don't really have permanence like that, like this rather. Um, but for simple games, it's very effective at making the game look interesting, even though you're not really changing the gameplay at all. Um, However, it does affect readability. So this one, um, use cautiously, I would say. Um, you would want things that have permanence, like these ammo casings. I specifically made them very dark. They're yellow. They're not a bright yellow. They're more of a dark yellow, unlike the bullets, in order to help with readability. So just be smart about the design choices like that. Um, if you do choose to implement them, they can be very effective when you do them correctly. And let's move on. Hit stop. This is a major game changer, just in terms of how to make actions more satisfying. Um, so this simply means um, the game freezes for a couple of frames, a couple or so frames. I forget how many. Um, Whenever something there, honey, just chill. Um, so hit stop is when the game freezes for a couple frames or so, and this is very, very effective to use whenever something, whenever a big action happens on screen that you really want to emphasize, or even small actions that you want to emphasize. The bigger the action, the longer you want to freeze the frame for. So when an enemy dies, it's more obvious, I would say, because it lasts longer. You may not even notice whenever I'm shooting an enemy, the game pauses for like very, very brief moment, and whenever I kill an enemy, it pauses for just a little bit longer, so that you will reward the player more for killing enemies, but you also want them to feel rewarded for shooting them, because that's the goal of the game after all. Whatever your goal is, you want to reward the player by making their actions feel satisfying. I'm imagining the Ultra Kill parry sound effect when an enemy dies. Yes. Yes. Ultra Kill is very, very good at all of these techniques. When you get a parry in Ultra Kill, it freezes for even longer than this, to really emphasize the satisfaction of parrying a bullet. Um, yeah, the longer you pause for, the more satisfying it'll feel for sure. Explosions. Um, this one. Oh, just look at that. Oh, that's good. Okay, so this implementation in particular, I chose to have it affect the gameplay, and I'll show you later on a version of this exact same demo without explosions affecting gameplay. But for a simple game like this, it is very effective, and not only is it satisfying, um, it's kind of makes the game more tactical. It really gives the player a reason to not just kill an enemy right away. For example, they can strategize who they want to shoot first and what order. Little details like this can really improve the gameplay. However, in a more complex game, maybe this would be too much. But for a simple game like this, it is very satisfying, and it's pretty easy to implement. So these explosions that I'm using are just very basic circles, just to show you don't really need to be an artist to make your game feel satisfying and to use any of these techniques. This is just a basic circle that starts from black and then becomes white. So the emphasizing the color, the contrast between the black turning to white really emphasizes the animation more, which is why I chose those two colors specifically. Yes, to be clear, the explosions are damaging nearby enemies. That was just something that I included for this demonstration to make the game feel more exciting. That little detail in particular is not necessary for your game. You can choose to implement that way if you like, but really any game, most games would be improved with explosions. If you're making a dating simulator, explosions will make it better. Yeah, bomb dating sim. Love bomb. Oh yeah, I'm glad Larry pointed that out. There's other impact effects you can add, like blood shots or something. Um, yeah, blood splatter is a very, very good and common technique used. I won't be showing that off in this game, but I have used blood splatter in different games, and it doesn't have to be blood. I've used it personally. I've used paint splatter before, where you're shooting like a paint gun, just like things like that. Really, not only add to the impact, but you can also use it on for permanence. So like you can shoot an enemy and their blood splatters everywhere, and then it also stays on the ground. That's a little more complicated, I would say, but you can definitely do that as well. Feel free to take these techniques and spice them up in your own way. And yeah. Environment reactions. The game felt a little just a little empty to me, where it's just you and a bunch of enemies, and that's okay. But often you want different objects in your game. So like, if you miss an enemy, it can like if you miss, let's say you're in a shootout, right? And while you're shooting enemies, maybe you miss. Like, oh, stuff. Okay, see, I didn't even predict that. I wasn't even trying to do that, but it just creates interesting interactions like this, where I shot someone, they exploded, their explosion triggered a chain reaction with the bomb, or I'm sorry, the barrel over there, the toxic waste barrel that explodes when you shoot it. So environmental interactions like this are very nice. You don't necessarily have to incorporate gameplay. So the I have a bomb. Yes. So when the bomb doesn't necessarily have, I'm sorry, you don't have to add bombs necessarily into your game. I'm just trying to get the point across that you can add objects into your game. Maybe you add a bush or a tree or something. So like when you're shooting an enemy, like your bullet misses them and it hits something behind them. Or cowboy movies do this thing where they often take place in saloons, and bar fights are really great because they often have empty glass bottles and stuff all over the place. And so if you shoot someone and you miss, it hits a bottle and the bottle explodes, and it's a lot more exciting than just missing a shot and not hitting anything. So even if your bullet misses something and it like doesn't affect the gameplay, it can be a lot more exciting to add details like that, where where even if your player misses or if the enemy misses, there can be objects all around the room that just break. And then maybe you want to spice things up, like I did here, and maybe those objects explode, and they can be used for different strategies. Breath of the Wild has a lot of great examples of environmental interactions you can use. Also, Meta Go Solid, says Larry. Yeah, agree. And then Solomon says the first Fear game is really good for this. Yeah. A lot of games do this. It's a very, very good technique to use that you can get really creative with. Movement. Okay, so here I felt it was a little boring just teleporting everywhere. Looks a lot nicer to have some movement animation. This one's pretty basic. This one's in our club in particular. Most people, I don't think I've seen anyone miss this technique or quote unquote technique of just having like movement animations. It's a lot more exciting now, just moving around, because movement is a gameplay mechanic technically. Maybe easy to overlook, but it's one of the it's honestly like the most used action your player is going to take. They're moving around all over the place. That's the most common thing they're going to be doing. So you might as well make it a little exciting. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So yeah, you bring up a very good point with like arms moving and such. Um, well, during research, I couldn't implement this personally myself because I'm not an artist, but you can. Uh, a very good piece of advice I read was to not just if have one direction of movement in your animations. Um, Sometimes you want things to be moving in two different directions at once. For example, um, walking. Maybe your leg is moving, stepping forward, but your arm is pointed backwards. And I may not be able to explain that visually with this demonstration, but it's just little detail. Um, since Larry brought that up, and then sound effects. Oh, let's see. Since we're nearing the end, this sound effects are just very easy, or I'm sorry, very intuitive, easy to understand. Now we're getting somewhere. Now this is Yeah. Can you guys hear this, by the way? Actually? Oh, that's right. I have to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember now. And then shift here. All right. So you can hear this now, right? So with sound effects, of course, with shooting, it's very intuitive and easy for most people, or most people would think to add gunshot sound effects. A little detail that I included was walking sounds. A lot of big games do this, but a lot indie games, it's less common, I would say. Especially for action games. Pretty simple. However, some little known technique is to increase the bass of your sound effect if you really want to give it some more impact. Now, this one's primarily for action games. And the most notorious story of this was a Wolfenstein developer who was told one of the guns was too weak, and so he was basically just told to go make the gun stronger. And so he opened up the audio file and increased the bass, and then he sent it back, and suddenly people liked it. Not only did people like it more, they actually thought the gun was stronger, even though it didn't affect gameplay in the slightest bit. So that's how powerful this technique can be if you use it properly. This one. Very nice. It just gives, so adding bass just really gives a lot more oomph to your actions. Honestly, with the reason I added the Vine Boom was just, you don't really have to take my word for it. I'm sure you guys have seen tons of memes using the Vine Boom for things that have nothing to do with action or violence or guns or punching things or anything like that. Just like mundane things feel a lot more exciting by adding that. And of course, you don't have to add the Vine Boom in particular. You may have picked up that whenever an enemy dies, there's this very deep sound effect that's kind of sounds a little chiptune. Let me just demonstrate it 1 second. Yeah, that sound effect right there when an enemy dies also emphasizes the bass a little bit. You would just want death in particular to feel very satisfying, feel very powerful. Finally, this one's a bonus step. Not really much of a technique at all, really. I added this last slide in to just say you can really have fun with these techniques however you feel like it. You can, and just to emphasize, this doesn't just work for games with boring squares and rectangles. These techniques do work for silly animations like this. Like whenever I'm shooting, the rat is kind of animating, like squashing and stretching in a very cartoonish way, and it just works, even though it's not necessarily realistic for a rat to be contorting in that way. I mean, it works. Hello, I'm doing the presentation right now.
Okay.
Rats Prince. Yes, this is official Rats Prince gameplay. Not actually, though. And while I'm in this phase of personalizing your game, I would like to say the most important technique that doesn't even have its own slide is playtest. Playtest, playtest, playtest. If you think you've playtested enough, you probably haven't. As you can see, I already found a bug previously with the slowdown because I forgot to delete objects. But more importantly, or equally as important as finding bugs, is just playing around with the details until they feel right. When I was making this, I played around with the specific Yes, it's my dog's birthday today. You didn't. Yeah, she's the one who walked off earlier, so I didn't get a picture of her. Yes, happy birthday to Kiwi. And let's see. While I was making this, it was very fast and like rushed implementation of things. So when I was coding this, and if you take a look at the source code, if you feel like doing so, you may see I did not use best coding practices, which I would say is okay for beginners. If you really don't need the perfect code to get something that's fun to play. And I hope I've demonstrated that in this little prototype. If you play it for yourself, I hope you can feel some amount of fun. Just look at that guy. Look at this rat. Look at that. Wouldn't you want to play this compared to this? I mean, look at it. It doesn't even have screen shake. Look at this. Yeah, this is much more exciting. I would, maybe you prefer this, but, I think most people, and the people playing your game, because you are just one person after all, and there's a lot more other people than yous in the world, who would rather be playing something more like this. And since we are game developers after all, we are making games for other people. And so, oh yes, important advice rather. When you're playtesting, of course, you should be playtesting yourself initially, for finding initial bugs and stuff like that. But once that's all said and done and you feel like your game's ready to be shown to other people, you really should show it to other people and get their advice on it. while you're still in the playtesting mode, because they're probably going to uh, they're probably going to find things that it's very easy for them to find bugs that you are personally avoiding. Like you may not like it. Some family and friends when they playtest your game and tear it to shreds and say look at all these horrible bugs. It's unplayable or whatever. But I mean, really, you really owe it to the people who may love your game to take that feedback and improve upon your game, since this is what that workshop is all about after all. You really owe it to the people who love what you may love what you're capable of, to make something amazing. And it's just that's my bit. And are there any more questions? Let's see. Informative. Oh, okay, so you would like to know about what best coding practices are, and there's maybe Larry has an example of this. I personally just find I just learn best coding practices as I go. Really, you can. There's lots of different resources. There's no one place, but it seems like Larry has a lot more resources than I do. Yeah, if you take a look, I don't have too many comments, but I do have some big ones. Even though I was rushing, I still keep these very important comments like this is following the player, like because it can be difficult to tell just by looking at alarm zero. Like right here, I forgot to put anything here. What does alarm zero do? I don't know. Oh, it destroys itself. That's pretty important to know, but um, yeah, you really should add, right here, I didn't add any comments for this bullet, even though this is pretty important stuff. Um, yeah, and common coding practices are not unique to game development at all. It's just really the fact that they're not unique to game programming is just a testament to how you don't necessarily need to know best coding practices. My personal advice is that you shouldn't worry about them at all until you have a working prototype, like something like this. At this point in the stage, if I was to make this a whole real game instead of just an educational demonstration, if I was going to make a full game, I would go back and add more comments, and I would buffer some things out and maybe change some variable names. But you should get to this stage first, is my advice. Once you're at this stage of making a game that's satisfying, once you're at this point, then you should start worrying about common coding practices.
Yeah, and the more you program, the better you become, and you'll start to learn more design patterns and different things. Yeah, yeah, that's actually a really good website.
Yeah, a lot of it you just learn by doing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, did I miss any questions? Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? Questions, comments? All right. Oh, okay. Since, oh, it looks like someone's typing. I'll wait for them. Okay, I guess while we're waiting, I just wanted to show something. Okay. When I was making a script for this, or like an outline, I found an example of hit stop used in the Matrix, where you're punching. Someone gets punched in the face and it slows down. Matrix in particular is great for this kind of stuff, as well as it's used in video games like Street Fighter. The game pauses as she hits, and you can it really feels emphasized when she punches Ryu like that, and you can really feel the hit stop, and it just makes the game more. So just fill your game with love and tiny little details, and it'll be a lot better for it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.